Okay, Erev Tov, everybody. Like I said, a big yasher koach for coming. I know this schedule is a little bit unusual, but I think this is a better time than 8:30 when the fast ends, depending on where you live. But between 8:30 and 9:30, I think most people here, that's when the fast ends. So that's not a great time for a shir. Torah is wonderful, but, eating is also good. Anyways, it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Chaim Metzger, and I want to thank him really for coming in at the last minute. We had a slight change in plans, but those are things behind the scenes. But anyways, it's a pleasure to welcome him. As you heard, he is now living in a lunch food in Israel. He spent 2 years in the Zichron Dov Beit Midrash here in Toronto. He teaches, I believe, at Midrashet Amudim, girls seminary in Israel. He has a degree in mathematics and physics. He attended Yeshiva University, Yeshiva Har Etzion, and it's a pleasure to welcome to making his first appearance on the Torah in Motion Zoom channel. And Vakasha, Parshat Pinchas, let's hear what we're going to hear about. Okay, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kalman. So I'm going to be speaking tonight about primarily about Bnot Tzlaf from a couple of different perspectives. So I'm going to be sharing screen. Don't worry, I'll still be seeing you. I'm going to be doing a screen share. Don't worry, I see everybody still. There we go. That's big enough for everybody. Nice and clear. Okay. So before we get into the actual text, so I'm going to start by asking a question. Okay. So what seems to be the motivating factor behind Bnot Tzlaf? Right? Does it seem to be feminist? Does it appear to be Zionist? So before we look at anything, I'm going to just pose that to the floor, and everybody can take a vote as to where from what they've heard before, what they think.
They don't have any brothers. Their father's dead. There's no safety net for money and stuff like that. They would need the land to support themselves.
So you're saying that lends towards the feminist reading, that they're doing it for the sake of their needs, not for the sake of any ideals related to the land of Israel.
Well, they love the land of Israel too, but they also need the land to be able to live. They don't want to be the ones that are just gleaning somewhere on everybody else's charity. They want to be productive people.
Okay, so hybrid approach. Got it. Okay.
They're using the same language as the people who were with Pesach Sheni. I mean, there's a passion to be part of this whole enterprise. I think I don't think you can take the feminists out of it, and I don't even know if that's the right term for this, but they want the land, they want to be part of the community. And I think that's the motivating force. As I say, it's the same language as the people who don't want to be left out of Pesach Sheni. They want closeness to God, and it's going to be through the land.
Okay. Any other takers?
I think that they're interested in their own future, and I think it's appropriate for everyone to protect himself. And they want to ensure their own future.
Okay, so ensuring their own future. Okay, so that'll be also leaning kind of in the middle. Okay.
Okay,
so,
I have another question. Yes. So are these women reported because they were the only ones who asked, or because they were the only ones to whom they got an answer yes?
Presumably the only ones who actually asked. As in generally somebody's highlighted, there could be others, but oftentimes they simply have to be the only unique individuals. As we'll see, they're not unique in the love of Israel, but as far as the situation goes, they appear to be unique, as well as we'll see we hear more about them. It's not just a one-off question. So
there is strength in numbers. There's 5 of them. They're moving forward. Every one of those names has a sense of motion in it, in the root. And they are moving forward. They don't want their father's name to be forgotten, and they want part of that land.
Okay, so we added another dimension, not just for themselves, but also for the sake of their father. Okay, their father's name. Okay, good. right? So we're adding another dimension, not just, the feminism or Zionism, love of the land, but also the sake of, the family. Okay, good.
What about if they will have children that will be a man, and they will ask the question?
Right. So we're going to get to that question. What happens next? Right. So that's going to be more towards the end of environment. We'll get there by the end of this year. So good, right? What'll happen, if they have sons? What's going to happen? Good. Okay, so now we've got all these. Now, currently, I think we've got three options now for what their motivations are. We've got for the sake of themselves, right, which would lend more towards the feminist read. We've got for the sake of they love the land of Israel. That's the second one, and then the third one would be it's for the sake of the family's sake, right? The other two might be tied in, but again, primary being towards the father's sake. So before we can actually judge that, so I think it might be a good idea to read the story itself and see what we find, what is unique about the way that they present themselves. Okay, so an important thing to start with is the words that they start with, right? So the first word that's mentioned is Vatikravna, right? That they drew close, right? So this term, right, is comes up many times throughout the Torah, but the most frequent use of it actually is for the bringing of korbanot, for bringing of sacrifices, right? In Vayikra, right? That's the most common time that this root comes up, right? That you bring a korban, but here this is their way of coming close to God. Okay, so now let's keep on reading through. Okay, so then as we go, I'll note important features that don't seem necessary, but are going to be telling about their motivations and where they're going. Okay, so then as far as the family, we heard about the family note. So here it says Benot Tzlafchad, right? Before we hear who they are, we start with their lineage of Ben Chefer, Ben Gilad, Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, Mishpachot, Menashe, Ben Yosef. Because first before we hear their name, we hear about their family name. And then we hear about Machla, Noach, Avla, Umelkav, and Tirtzah, right? And then we get to their name. Right? But first and foremost seems to be the family, right? Where they're descended from. And then with the question, so where are they asking this question? Right? So it would seem, so how do they go about it? So then then we get to verse number 2, right? But Tamodna lifnei Moshe, then they now stood before Moshe. But not only before Moshe, which you'd expect. Oh, you ask Moshe, he's in charge. But they keep going. Lifnei Elazar Kohen, in front of Elazar the Kohen Gadol. Lifnei Nesiim, and in front of all the princes, all the leaders of all the different tribes. B'kol Eidah, in front of all the Jewish people. Petach ol Moed Lemor, by the entrance of the Mishkan. Say it. Right? So they're not only are they stepping forward, they're stepping forward in a big sense. So it was asked before, were they the only ones? I can't imagine there were many women who had the courage to stand up in front of, or even men for that matter. The number of men who have stood up until this point on their own are, as was mentioned, there's for Pesach Sheni, and then there's the Nesiim who would step forward at one point, but it's not a very common thing to do. It takes a lot of courage, and they're doing it in front of absolutely everybody. And then we hear what they have to say, right? So let's hear the words that they say. So they say, Avinu mit b'midbar, our father died in the desert. V'hu lo haya b'toch ha'edah hanodim al Hashem b'dat Korach, and he was not amongst the group that had gone against God in the congregation of Korach. Ki b'chato met, rather he died for whatever reason on his own. V'anim lo hayolo, and he had no kids. And so here we see clearly they're saying that their father, he died for whatever reason. They don't give this. They say that it was not due to him being anti anything that has occurred or any part of the bad group that we've seen so far in Bamidbar. And his only crime was that he had no kids. He had no sons, right? He had daughters, he had no sons. So how is that going to be fair? So now they continue. Lama Yigara. Right? Why should we get less? Shem Avinu, we talk about Mishpachto. Why should our father's name be any lesser amongst his family? Right? A clear emphasis here on the family. Ki ein lo ben, because he has no children. Sorry, no son. Sorry. Tana lanu achuzah. So please give us a portion. B'toch achavinu, amongst the brothers of our father, right? Amongst our uncle. So Vayakrev Moshe Mishpatan Lifnei Hashem. And now we see the word again. We had the word before of bringing. Now we have here, instead of just being that they came close, now we see the same root being coming up by Moshe. That Moshe now brings their case, before God. Right, so we're seeing that. So far, it seems good, right? Their case is solid, right? Moshe's reaction is reasonable. To say that he simply brings it straight to God. So and then here he goes. So he brings it before God, and God has a very straightforward answer. Cain benot Tzlachad dobrot. The daughters of Tzlachad are speaking correctly. You shall surely give to them a portion of inheritance, amongst their brothers of their father. Sorry, my you'll transfer the portion of their father to them. Right. So again, so here we see, right, quite clearly again the connection to their lineage, to their father and their father's household. We also see the word mentioned twice is the question of the nachala. Right. So here we see the portion being mentioned twice, what God says, also mentioned earlier also. Right. So we see the clear connection to the portion of the land of Israel as well. And now we see the general rule, right? So in case there happens to be any other women who have a similar circumstance, but might not necessarily have voiced their opinion, here's a general rule that will be case going forward. Vel b'nei Yisrael tzeber more. So tell this to b'nei Yisrael, ish ki yamut, if a man passes away, uvein ein lo and has no sons, v'avartem v'nachalto lebito, then you shall transfer his portion, again nachala, to his daughter. V'im ein lo bat, and if he has no daughter, then the portion goes to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, and if he has no brothers, then it'll end up giving his portion will be given to the brothers of his father. And if his father was only had no brothers, they shall give it, the portion, to his relative who's closest to him from his family, and they shall inherit it. And then this shall be a law, a judgment, as God has commanded to Moshe. All right, so as far as the emphasis of the words themselves, right? So it appears that the primary of the words are repeated the most. So we saw the word nachala being repeated many times, right? Portion of the land. We saw relationships to the parent unit, to the family unit many times, and we saw in the technical note is the question of it seemingly is the question of the bito, right? The daughters don't seem to be the primary, right? The number of times that the word daughters comes up, right? So not counting when it says benot tzlachad, it's seemingly only when it says if you happen to not have a daughter, right? And then it'll go to the daughter. So it comes up only, not counting the names of benot tzlachad, it comes up only 3 times in this whole unit, which is not a lot for, if we're saying that the whole point is about the question of where their status as women, it doesn't, and that's the purpose. It doesn't seem to hold up based on simply the numbers of the words being used, as well as the words that they chose to use. Right? Their initial argument was, again, they started leading with talking about their father, and then they talked about the nation, and they talked about the family getting a portion of the land and the name of their father. They did not mention anything. They mention very little about their current status. They're just a technicality, right? We currently can inherit, but they weren't doing it as a case for the sake of for the sake of them as women. It was for the sake of their family and their father's name. Because also you'll note that the answer that God gives, it doesn't only talk about the case scenario that occurs if there are no sons and there's only daughters, but also about a scenario if there's no children whatsoever. If there's no children whatsoever, we have a whole way of redistribution of the property so that it will not be lost to the rest of the tribe. This way it'll remain and therefore the name will not be forgotten. That you'll remember that this was the land of, in this case, Tzlachad. Even if it goes to his daughters, to his brothers, to his uncles, to his nearest relative, it will still be clear that it's staying within the family, connected to that original individual. So it appears actually, from what we've just read, that it seems to be more that it's connected to the family than it is to their status as women, and even the land seems secondary to the case of family. Usually that's what it seems. by the numbers, right? We had Nakalah happening a lot. So then it now seems to be, a tie between, the portion, the land itself, as well as the strength of ties to family. So now I'm just going to pose a question on the floor before we go next. So does anybody happen to know the next time that that Benot Tzlafchad occur in the Torah?
The end. Wait.
The last part of Bamidbar, last
Yeah.
chapter.
Very good. The last chapter of Bamidbar, and there we see a very strange, a very strange thing going on. We see people, their relatives coming forth and protesting the previous verdict. Right? God laid out these clear rules: who gets the land, how it goes, and then all of a sudden we have these individuals coming in and saying it's not fair. And based on what we saw, seemingly what Benot Tzlafchad stood for is they stood for the values of family, the land of Israel, make sure that everybody has an ability to have a portion. It seems like that they're completely in the right. How could you possibly argue against that? But along come some individuals who are their cousins and start protesting. And we'll see that there's a lot of taking note of some of the similar language. For instance, the first word, just before we had Vatikravna, right, which is the feminine verb of coming close. But now we have, right, the cousins of Benot Tzlafchad coming, Vayikrevu, right, the same word of coming close, they drew near. Rashei Havot, again, the head of the families. Mishpachot b'nei Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe, the family of Gilad, the son of Machir, the son of Menashe. Mishpachot b'nei Yosef, again, related to Yosef. Again, note Mishpachot, family, being very prominent here. And Vayidabru lifnei Moshe lifnei Nesiim, Rashei Avot l'bnei Yisrael. They spoke before in front of Moshe, in front of the Nesiim, and in front of all the heads of all Bnei Yisrael. Right, so the setup sounds very similar. Right, the initial verse, right, they're coming close in front of everybody, very public. Not just simply, oh, by the way, we're going to come over to the side and ask. No, asking in front of everybody. And then what do these men say? Vayamru, and Adoni Tziva Hashem Latei Teretz V'Nakalav Garal of Bnei Yisrael. So they say, our master Moshe has commanded us, as we hear from God, to give us the land according to its portion by lottery. V'Adoni Tzuva B'Hashem, and again, my master, meaning Moshe, has been commanded by God. Latei Nachalat Tzlafchad Achinu Levnotav, and there, God commanded to give the portion of Tzlafchad, our brother, to his daughters. So now we're actually getting a little bit more about who this is, right? So these are the brothers of Tzlafchad. They're now coming forward saying, "Hey, this isn't fair." And so what's their worry? Their worry is maybe they will end up marrying one of the other tribes of Bnei Israel as wives. Then what's going to happen? Then we will lose out our portion, of our portion of that of our fathers. And it will share Tian 11. Instead, our portion will then go to another tribe. And our portion will be lessened. Our tribe, our family is losing out simply in order to give more of an opportunity to these daughters of Tzlafchad. That's not fair. How could this be? Right, so this is saying, and now if it happens to Yovel, then the land goes back for good. Then their portion will be added to their portion. Will go to them fully. And from our portion, we will end up having less. Okay, so they have a very similar argument we heard before from the daughters of Tzlafchad. They're saying, we're going to lose out. It's our families. How can you take away from our family? Right? They seemingly are putting forth the same exact arguments, which if you want to look at it from a perspective, it sounds like being extremely rude. right? They know, they heard it last time, and they're deliberately choosing the same language to say that, hey, Moshe, you're wrong. How could you have done that? Right? That's what it seems like, right? It sounds exactly the same. And based on that, you would think, how could they possibly win this argument, right? How could they be coming forth? They say they're becoming close to God. Like, no, that just should be no. But then we see that that's not what happens. Moshe b'nei Yisrael pi Hashem lemor ken matev b'nei Yosef tovrim. Then we see that Moshe says that God said, no, these people are also correct. Cain. Okay, and then he continues. So then he says, no, here actually, this is the updated word of God that we should tell the God and how to remedy the situation. You can marry whoever is good in your eyes. You can marry whoever you want, as long as they're from your tribe, the tribe of your father. To them, you can marry. This way, there will not be a case of the portions of each tribe switching between each other. So instead, each of the portions, according to each tribe and their ancestry, that's how they will become close. They will stick to all of Bnei Israel. Okay. And so they will each end up inheriting the land from each of the tribe of Bnei Israel. Each one will be according to their own tribe. Each the tribe of their father. That's who they'll be able to marry. And Laman Yershuv, and therefore they'll be able to inherit all Bnei Israel. Each person will be each person's portion will be that of his father's portion. Okay. And this portion will not go from one to the other. This way, the portion will not go from tribe to tribe, and they will each stay in the right location. And Bnot respected this, right? And did as God said. So the question is so I started initially, it sounds like these cousins of Bnot Tzlachad are being very rude. How could they possibly utilize the same language? How could they claim to espouse the same values, the values of family, the values of the land of Israel, the land of our ancestors? How could they be saying that, right? Then, like, Bnot Tzlachad just fought and won this land that might have disappeared from their family. They came forward, they presented before God, and they won their case. What drives these cousins and relatives of the daughters of Tzlachad, right? So what's driving that? Right? What's driving right? What is driving these 5 women? Right? We so it's for the 5 women, but what about their cousins, right? What's driving them? Who are they? So the answer to that is, well, just like this, we just read the last chapter. So I'm going to skip the last 3 verses for now. We'll get back to them in a little bit. If you read them ahead while I was reading the rest of it, that's fine too. But before we get to the conclusion, let's learn more about these individuals. So next week in Parshat Matot, we're going to be seeing the after Bnei Israel again, we conquered Sichon and Og, we were the war against Midian. So Reuben and God seemingly get a little bit of cold feet. Right, Reuben and God, right, they start saying that they want to say that they like the land on the eastern side of the Yarden. They like the fact that they've got Miknei Rav, they have a lot of cattle, it's a good land for cattle, so let's say here because of our cattle. And right, so they ask it once, they ask it twice, and then we have right. So then initially we have time to read it inside. So we'll read inside the initial question of the Reuven and God, of the tribe of Reuven and God, and then we'll see Moshe's reaction, and then we'll finally be able to see our players, namely the cousins of Bnot Tzlachad. Okay, the children of Machir ben Menashe. Okay, so Miknei Rav Hayal Livnei Reuven Livnei Gad Atzuma Od. So there was lots of cattle to the sons, the descendants of Reuben and God, and they were quite. It was very much. So they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilad. And behold, that land is good for grazing cattle. And then so and behold, along came verse 2, they came before who? Note the word here is vayavo, not vayikrivu. Vayamru al Moshe ve'elazar kohen, they'll say deadly more. So they said again, similarly before, in front of everybody. What do they say? They're listing cities that were just conquered. This land that we just struck down, it is a land of cattle. And as you know, your servants, i.e. us, have lots of cattle. And then they're met with silence because everybody's like, I don't get it. Like, what are you asking? We all have cattle. We all just won this war. I don't understand what on earth you could possibly be asking. So then they continue. They say, if we have found favor in your eyes, please give this land to us and it'll be our portion. Al tavirenu et hayardain. Okay, give us this land as our portion, our final portion. Do not let us cross the Jordan. So, upon hearing this, it seems like, and it is the case, that Reuben and Gad are trying to split away from the rest of Bnei Israel, saying, we care about our cattle. We don't really care about the land. Right? What matters is our cattle, and that's what we want. And then we see Moshe's response, right? Vayomer Moshe livnei Gad v'nei Reuven. Moshe responds to them. Will your brothers go out to war and you will simply sit here? What do you mean you're not coming over the Jordan? What do you mean you're staying on one side? Don't you know that we need to go to war and conquer the rest of the land of Israel? Why are you moving aside and breaking the hearts of the rest of Bnei Israel? Why are you preventing everybody else, breaking their spirits from going to the other side of the Yarden? Okay, right. So that's what's going on here, right? We've got Reuben and Gad clearly not in it, and on the other hand, we have Bnei Israel that we have Moshe saying, "How could you possibly do that? Right? How could it possibly have done so?" So you would think that now this is going to break everything, right? That now it's going to be clear that nobody's going to end up getting, right? That now there's going to be a civil war. Something terrible is going to happen, right? But actually, again, I'm not going to read them inside, but we end up seeing a discussion between Reuven and God and Moshe, where he, makes sure that they're going to go in front, and that they're not going, and that they're going to make sure they take care of their families. Because they initially had their predators out of whack. Clearly, their cattle are more important than their children. Moshe sets them straight, saying, more important is your family than your cattle. And you also need to make sure that you join the battle and join the rest of Bnei Israel. You can't just simply cut yourself off from them. And then all of a sudden we see that Manasseh gets tacked on, right? Who are the tribes that are on the east side of the Jordan? Right? Reuven, Gad, Manasseh. Right? Reuven and Gad and half of Manasseh. The question is, well, why on earth is half of Manasseh winding up on the east side of the Yarden? Right? The land that's not quite the land of Israel, the part that gets exiled first, the part that ends up being throughout the rest of Jewish history as being, a little bit of the wild lands, the bad lands. So what is going on here? Like, how does that happen? How does Manasseh wind up over there? So one is, well, God said so. But also, let's take a look at the actions of Manasseh immediately following when they hear that. Right? Manasseh have just heard Reuven and God's piece about their doubts. They're not sure. They're greedy. They care more about their money than their families. And here's the response of the children of Machir ben Manasseh, right? The same family as Benot Zachad. immediately following, right? They're told that they will have a portion, they will also be on the east side, right? The east side of the Yarden. They will also end up being on that, having some people on that side. So the question is, well, why? Well, let's see their actions, then we'll judge them. So, so the sons of Menashe, of Machir, son of Menashe, went to the area of Gilad, which is north of the area that we just been in, of Sichon and Og. And what do? They simply conquer it. A whole large swath of land. They simply go in, they conquer it. They get rid of all of them who are in that area. And so, Gilad, the Machir ben Menashe, so Moshe gave the Gilad to the descendants of Machir, the son of Menashe, and they resided there. Ve'ir ben Menashe, halach l'kodei chavoteihen, and so Yair, the son of Menashe, went and he conquered Chavoteihem, the suburbs. Vayikra oten Chavot Yair, and he called it Chavot Yair. But Novach halach vayilkod et knaf et brateh vaykrala Novach b'shmo. And then we see that Novach, similarly, again another descendant of Menashe, conquers Canaan and all of its subsidies, and he calls it Novach in its name. And it's called Novach after him. And that's where we end up, and that's where, and that's the end of that section of the giving the land to the two and a half tribes. So what exactly is going on here? Like, what exactly is the purpose being served by these individuals? Right. So we mentioned that these are the same, that they are clearly related to Bnot Tzlaf, right? We've got Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, and we had, right, when we go back to the top, sorry. So Ben Chefer, Ben Gilad, Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, right? So again, these are the same people, right? The portion that Machir ends up getting is the Gilad. The Gilad located on the eastern side of the Yarden, that's the portion. Yeah, wait a minute, but weren't the Bnot Tzlaf supposed to be on, like, didn't they love the land? They didn't want to lose a portion. So why are Bnot Tzlaf, their portion, also being handed over on the east side of the Yarden? Right? Like, how is this fair? What is going on? Right? Clearly, we see that they changed the story. Right? Before it looks like, Bnei Israel is scared, their heart's in the wrong place, and yet the second that Bnei Machir ben Menashe hear of this, they go and conquer an entire another portion of land, almost the same size as the land that Reuben and Gad are really fighting over. Right. So also, if you take a look at the map of the portion of the tribes, you'll see that actually the portion of Menashe is basically double that of every other tribe. Right, it's more than double. Right, the biggest portion on the east side of the Yarden, and the biggest portion on the west side of the Yarden. So what exactly is going on? So, well, one thing that we can tell from the actions of Bnei Machir ben Menashe is the fact that they clearly love the land. They clearly, when God says this is our land, we're going to be living here, they put their full effort into it. Right? They immediately went when they heard that Menashe was supposed to be on the east side of the Yarden. They don't fight over the land that currently belongs to Reuben or Gad that they just were given. They instead go and conquer a whole new portion for themselves. That's what they go ahead and do. They show their degree of personal initiative, what they want to do. They go ahead and they conquer the land of Israel. Right? Well, soon to be land of Israel. And we see that what is it becoming the case here is that all this area seemingly gets called by their names. Right? So they conquer the Gilad, but was it called Gilad before, or is it only called Gilad because it was conquered by the sons of Machir, who happened to be the name of Gilad? Right, so that's not just that. So they changed the entirety of not only the area, they changed the names. Right, they changed everything about the eastern side of the Yarden by their conquering. Right, these are men. This is a family that clearly cares about the land, and is clearly not going to be dissuaded by simply the fact that Reuben and Gad got a little bit of cold feet or a little bit greedy. That's not going to get in their way. And so, returning back a little bit to what we had before, right? To the end of the previous section, right? That these men who love the land of Israel, who are spearheading it, first going to battle without anybody else telling them to, conquered on their own, unaided by any other family, So these are the men that are coming before Moshe saying, it's not fair that for our portion to maybe go to somebody else, because we're not sure that anybody else besides our tribe would actually be sufficiently in line with our values. They might not actually care about the land as much as we do. So we want to make sure that it's the land that we just fought for. We want to make sure that this land stays, people who appreciate the land for what it's worth. And that's when they're asking their question, right? They want to make sure that this land that they're getting right now is staying with people who will appreciate it and people who really care about it. That's their thing. They're not saying, oh, you're taking our money. No, they're saying, this is our land. This is our inheritance from our fathers that we worked for ourselves. We are part of that chain, and this chain will not be broken, not on our watch. And so we said that the daughters of Slavchad accepted what God had said. We see them say that, right? We see that the land's going to get is that it's updated. The law is updated according to what the sons of Machir, the son of Menashe, are saying. And we see that the Bnot Slavchad accept it too. And not only do the Bnot Slavchad accept it, they do more than simply accept it. So what happens? Vatiena, Machla, Vetirza, Vechagla, Amilka, Venoah, Bnot Slavchad, Livnei, Dodehen, Linashim. Right? These 5 trailblazing women, Machla, Tirza, Chagla, Amilka, Noah, these daughters of Slavchad, they marry their cousins. And who are these cousins? These are from the family of Menashe, son of Yosef. And therefore, the portion remains under the tribe of their father. So when we say that they got married, does this seem to be a marriage made in heaven or something else? So before I give my take, let me see if I've led you all down the right direction. Okay, if you all have been following me so far. Does it make sense, with what we've said so far, that Bnot Slavchad would end up marrying their cousins? Does it seem fair? According to the values that each one has. Seeing the chat, I've got a yes. I'll go back and answer the questions when I'm done with after the section. I'll look back to the questions. I apologize for not noticing. So we're all in agreement. Yes, it makes sense. Somebody want to protest and say it's not fair?
Not fair.
Why not?
They should be able to marry whoever they want. And in terms of repatriation of the land would occur at Yovel in any case. Right? So that here they say that at Yovel for the wife's husband if she marries. But realistically at Yovel, the land should be able to go back to its original tribe, and they should have been able to marry whoever they wanted.
Well, it appears from the verses that during Yovel it actually would stay with it. They married that and they properly inherited the land. It would stay with the new tribe. And that is the argument of.
I think at the other time in Yovel, really the land goes back to its original owner.
Right. So that's the case for land purchases, but that's not the case for inheritances.
Okay. And
so as in correct. Yes, you're right. Yes, it is. It seems unfair. They can't marry whoever they want. You are correct. It does seem unfair.
So, and occasionally, can you clarify? They talk about an achuza versus a nachala. Is there a difference?
So not so much in terms of the meaning of the word, but as far as the nachala seems to be your individual portion, achuza seems to be the larger one. But as far as they seem to more or less be synonyms. I mean, I'm sure there's differences according to the Radak, who says every word has to be different, but roughly speaking here, it seems to be roughly synonymous. As in portion of is the nachala of, like nachalat, whereas achuza simply is the area that you are currently in. But the main word, the most frequent term used here is nachala. I think achuza is only mentioned once.
Look,
Yeah,
In
The
in
other
those
thing-
days, your father could betroth you to at age 12 to whoever he wanted. So I mean, to marry your cousins isn't that may not be that awful.
right.
And the
You-
important
At
other
least here
thing-
they had the choice as to which they could marry. It could be anybody in their tribe.
Right. They have 30,000 options.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that Moses, when he gave this further further legalism, he broadened it to all the tribes, it wasn't just the tribe of Manasseh that had daughters only. He broadened it to any family in any tribe. So each of the daughters only families was subjected to the same limitation, we might say, for who they could marry.
Right.
That's
Yes, so it is
fair.
limiting.
That's fair.
Right. So here we see two conflicting things going on here, right? Because we see literally the marry whoever you want, Lato Benehem Tied Lanashim. Right. So therefore, on the one hand, it is seemingly very progressive because it's saying you can marry whoever you want, which is not, a given at that time period at all. Saying a person, but from your tribe. Right. So seemingly it's a modified version of complete choosing. I'm seeing the chat here. Some say it's not fair. It seems more like it's a halachic workaround. Okay. So, I mean, yes, it does kind of look like that. But I think that means we've been learning a lot of Gemara together. So that's what we get.
Isn't
Here,
the whole thing rather fluid? Isn't there more land for the tribes which stay on the west side of the Jordan because of the 2.5 tribes who forsake their section in that area and go to the east side? So this whole thing is rather fluid.
Right.
Presumably, if the 2.5 tribes stayed on the right side of the Jordan, meaning the western part, there would be less land for every tribe.
Correct. Right. So overall, they wind up being right. So they both add land at the same time as expanding it. Right. So both they give everybody more land by what they do. So they end up.
Let's look at the practicality of it. If the Bnot Slavchad, let's say, married a guy from Dan, so what would go on? She would move up to Dan, and they would have tenant farmers going on in their section, unless he was really poor and didn't have any section in Dan, and he would have to come farm her land. So there's and where would they meet people from Dan if everybody stays locally?
Also true, right? But so we noted that Menashe is kind of in the middle, though, as in Menashe has land on both sides, and is also smack in the middle, right? So this on both sides. It's the biggest, and also is clearly the one that's serving somewhat of a bridge. Before we get to the point of the bridge, just want to point out, just like if somebody wants to see I mentioned before about the parallels. So here's from I use Al Torah to make it more colorful, right? In terms of the degree of parallels of their presentations, right? And how even if they don't, let's say we might not agree necessarily on how well they fit marriage perspective wise, but how they definitely fit in terms of linguistic choice of word choice wise, right? Well, one is of course that they're related, so that comes up the same. Right? We mentioned they both start with about the word of coming close, Vatikra versus Vayikurvu. We see the word a various form of father being the most common word, Milah Mancha seemingly, right? Coming up in each one, coming up 6 or 7 times in each section. And we see that the term Nakala comes up also in each 6 or 7 times. Right, so we see the 2 terms that are the most significant. Actually, no, more in the second one. The first in Bnot Slavchad, it comes Nakala is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, right? So, but we see many times the word Nakala. We see the Avot. Those are the 2 most common words. We see the word Mishpacha coming up 3 or 4 times in each as well. And we see the term Nigra'ah that we will not have any less. So all these things are showing that clearly they're both aligning, whether either intentionally or accidentally, with the same values, most likely intentionally. Right? Each of them have values of family at the forefront. They have the value of, right, between Avinu, or a father versus Mishpacha, or families, right? Also, they're presented, and their titles are done by the titles of the family, of Mishpachot. Right, so it's clearly there's a value of family, right, of ancestral ties, in addition to the question of the Nachala, of the portion they will receive. The portion they receive is clearly both in each quite prominently. So what ends up being the case of this inheritance? So this inheritance winds up being, so let me do one more, let me share back, right? Let me switch back to the original document. So as far as this, so I'm going to present my full opinion here. So that it makes perfect sense that they get married, because yes, their choice of what are limited from the original 600,000 to now only 50,000. But if you had to choose somebody to marry of the rest of Bnei Israel, there aren't many good options, right? The goal of presumably, based on what they said, of Notes of Chad, of we value our Nachala, our portion, we value the land of Israel, we value our ancestry, our family. So the only other people who mentioned these things at all, right, or done actions to support that fact, or we mentioned how they went and conquered it, which again, at that point didn't have any clear mentionings of a given, of their names weren't even really there yet so much. But here, right, we see that it's quite clear that it fits together, right? It makes sense that if Bnei Chad's values that they fought for and they got over the whole nation declared were the values of family, the values of everybody having a right to the land of Israel, the values of being of our father's name and our tribe's name not being lost, makes perfect sense that they end up marrying their cousins who have the same values, who put their money where their mouth is, right? Who make sure to put in all the energy they possibly can to ensure that they end up being those people. They end up being the people who will end up bridging the family, putting these values forward. It makes sense that they marry each other. And I mentioned before about the quick case about why they get split in half to the two sides. So to that, I'd like to quote from my teacher, Rabbi Menachem Leibtag, the question of why were they split, and what role would Mechir have played, right? This whole family of Mechir, including Notes Chad, what role were they playing? So the two sides of the Yarden seemingly have very much opposing values, right? We have, on the one hand, we have Reuven and Gad. Right, Reuven and Gad are seemingly very selfish, right? They're very greedy. They care about their cattle more than their families, right? That's what's going on the east side of the Yarden, right? And then on the west side is everybody else who seemingly values the land and values their family, right? But again, as far as being so clear cut what you value, like nobody stated it overtly. So Moshe was worried that people might change values. We don't want everybody joining the Reuven and Gad values being contorted. We need everybody to headed in the right direction. So instead, what ends up happening? What is God's plan? God's plan is that Menashe is going to be on both sides. Menashe is going to be on the side on the east of the Yarden as well as on the west of the Yarden. Menashe, who has a very large, clear, strong family, who clearly both value their family as well as value the land above all else. Right? The shortcoming that we saw the shortcoming we saw of Reuven and Gad, they didn't value family enough. They didn't value the land enough. Their greed took over everything else. But that is not the motivation remotely of Bnei Menashe. Their motivation is we care about our family. Bnei Menashe, they care about our portion of the land. They're not blinded by greed. Their values for having more land isn't because they're greedy. It's because it's our land, it's the land of Israel. We want it as much as we possibly can. Right, that is what Bnei Machir ben Menashe as well as Benot Machir ben Menashe. That is what they value, right? Benot Chad. They both value the same thing, and they're now going to be these family units that are going to be serving as the bridge between the two sides. They're going to bridge between people on the east side of the Yarden and the west side of the Yarden. They're going to make sure that everybody is educated with proper values, values of not only of a love of the land of Israel, but a love of the family and family values, and appreciating what each of them has and making sure that those ties stay strong, right? That was the goal and the hope, at least, the tribe of Menashe. So whether or not that plays out,
Rabbi, on
yeah.
the other hand, the problem is that the portion that went to Reuben and Gad was a land that, under the guidance of under the guidance of God, was conquered originally by the Israelites, and the portion that the sons of Machir went and got, that was not part of what God had determined would be part of the land of Israel. Whether it was on the east side or the west side of the Jordan, this was land that the sons of Machir went and conquered on their own, and it was not necessarily going to be part of the land of Israel. And as it turned out, it didn't.
So I mean, so to an extent, it was.
But you're saying that the sons of Machir were motivated by love of the land. That wasn't God's land. That was their own land. That was what they went and grabbed and dispossessed the people who were living there. And named or renamed all the villages with their names and not with God's names.
I mean, we don't totally name villages after God, though. As in, yes, they went ahead and they conquered it, but yeah, that was after they got they were told to do so by Moshe, said they're going to be on the east side. So they went and they conquered more land on their own volition. They went above and beyond what was expected of them in a very good way.
Well, I'm not sure it's a very good way to go out and conquer what you're not supposed to conquer.
It appears that they did the right thing, because they get only nothing but praise. So that's why I would be a little bit hesitant on that front, because it seems like that from the verses that they got exactly what they were requested. Meaning that God doesn't criticize them. God simply gives it to them. So just in terms of just pictorially, so we can see the portion, right, of Menashe, right? So we see here, so again, so they conquered Reuven and in God's area, or down here. This is where it used to be. Again, Cheshbon, again, the land of the Amorites down here.
That's the
right,
land from Og and Sichon.
Correct, and they conquered the land right here, because they were told they will have because they were told to have a portion on the east side of the Ardennes, and they wanted to make sure that it wasn't simply that it would be unambiguous what their goal is. Their goal is to make sure to show that they love the land that God tells them they can conquer. God says, we're conquering this land. So they go ahead and they start the work. They don't say, oh, we want to simply stop conquering, right? Which was also one of the worries that Moshe had about what Reuven and God were saying. And instead they say, no, we're not waiting. We're starting now. We're conquering the land as God wants us to. We don't need to join together with everybody else. But God said, conquer the land. So let's get started. What are you waiting for? You're all sitting here watching. Right? Reuben and God come before everybody and they say, hey, we don't want to go. We want to stay here. It's nice for our cattle. Right? Moshe gets upset. Right? But the rest of Bnei Israel kind of sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, watching this all play forth. And then the sons of Machir ben Menashe, they go forward and say, no, we're not waiting. We're not waiting until this whole thing goes, and then they decide because as part of the deal, Reuben and God had to end up building houses to house their families, which we didn't get into that part. So the children of Machir ben Menashe are being proactive within what God has told them to do, doing the right thing, conquering a land that one day will be the Jews, doing so in the exact right way as God intended. Yes, it does. It might be a little bit against the whole we only get exactly what God said, but if God says to do so, then we're in exactly the right place, and now is the time to conquer. And Menashe, as you see here, will be, again, despite being on two sides of the Ardennes, is a pretty large contiguous unit, and its area looks like it's roughly a third of the country, based on this, based on what this looks, at least by surface area, not by population.
Can I ask a question? What I want to know is, why didn't God when he's giving this whole long speech about the inheritance for all times, why doesn't he say that that the daughters, when they inherit, have to marry within the tribe? God obviously wanted people to ask something, but why did he want them to ask?
Good, right? So that is so Rashi makes that comment as well, right? So Rashi says, why is it that, come on, God knows what's going to happen. God knows the future. Why is he waiting for giving these laws over? So Rashi explains that the reason why the comment is made by Bnot Tzlaf, not by the Ben Machir, but is that God deliberately didn't give the halacha yet, right? Similar like the God didn't give the halacha yet of Pesach Sheni. God was waiting for these individuals to ask, so that way that they would have the merit of having it said in their name, which also serves as the fact is that the paragraph immediately following Bnot Tzlaf's request. Sorry, let me pull that up. So that's in. Okay, so if we go to, if we go to Bamidbar, chapter 27, verse 15. Here we go. Sorry, 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so immediately following what they did, the next chapter. The next subsection, right? So here we had the daughters of Slav God, right? So, and then we see that Moshe is requesting for, just 4 verses later, this is when Moshe requests for leadership for Bnei Israel, right? Because Moshe sees that what is the lacking that everybody is having right now? We're lacking leadership, right? We're lacking what to do next. We're lacking people besides Moshe who are reacting to things. Right, so that's the Moshe's initial reaction when he sees what Bnot Tzlaf did. He says, "Great, we have 5 women who are motivated. We've got Kalev and we've got Yoshua, right? He knows that they exist. That's not a very large sample set of people you trust to actually be, going forward and leading the people the rest, as we move into the new land. We need more. We need a definitive who's in charge, who's going to lead them, because it seems like not everybody's actually on board with what we have in mind, and that's where." And that's why Moshe has to ask it, because he's looking for somebody to step up. And what God does by not simply giving us the fully formed law, by giving a chance for Bnot Tzlaf and Machir ben Masheh as well as others to come forth, is that God is giving the ability for individuals to take that step, to become and take their step into the leadership role and into the role of the land of Israel that they will soon be having. But it's also one of the reasons that stated why did the Midrash talks about how initially there was a possibility of all the Torah being given to Moshe, how the first book literally had El Torah that would ever be written and included in it. But why was it not included in it? So the Midrash continues that it's not included in it because this way every generation will be able to be adding its own piece of the Torah, right? Each individual will be able to connect to the Torah if they are able to have some way to add and connect. And that is why sometimes, yes, it's like, come on, it's really brand new when somebody reads nowadays into the text. It was always there. It's like, that's true. The fact that nowadays somebody is discovering it, or even if again it had always been intended by God, the fact that somebody nowadays is discovering it is showing that they too are connected to the Torah, that they too are connected to the land of Israel and everything else, and they too are part of it, and not simply standing from behind being bystanders, but are actively being proactive and leading in the right direction. Okay, I'm seeing anybody. I see there's a question in the chat of wouldn't the other tribes be jealous that Manasseh got such a large portion? Good question. They might be, but generally most of the tribes had more than enough land. At least at the beginning, when tribes didn't have enough land, such as when the tribe of Dan found that they didn't have enough land near the area near where the Plishtim were. So there's a bit of debate. According to the commentators as to why they left. Maybe they should have just conquered where the Philistines were, but instead they went up north and they conquered an entire another section north of where the rest of the tribes were. So there is other. So then there. So Manasseh is actually the only tribe that, when they ran out of space, or before they ran out of space, decided to conquer a new portion for the land of Israel. That it is perfectly fine and legitimate to do, according to the Nevi'im. The status of the land halachically is a separate discussion, but that's beyond the scope of what we get to today.
not all the land would be equal anyway in the sense of what it would be good for. You, if you're got a mountainous land, you might not be able to farm it as well as some other fertile land. Or if you get something in the desert, you know, in the Negev, it also might not be as good for farming.
This is correct. Excellent point. Yes, that is. I believe that is also, yes, that Rashi mentions that as well. That as according to the Midrash, that is also yes, not every land can be evaluated simply based on the service area, because again, it's all empty. Yeah. So such as in Israel nowadays, most of the country lives in a very small stretch of about 50 square miles. About half the population of Israel lives right now in the area around Tel Aviv, the Merkaz. But that's just simply how it goes. So the Negev's empty. If anybody ever wants to move there, plenty of room. Just saying.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi, and enjoy the rest of the summer and a good trip back to Israel and all the best. Okay, tomorrow morning, of course, my regular shiur 9:30 on the Siddur. Next week, Rabbi Leiptag kicks off at 11:15. As usual, we'll have two sort of new shiurim, special shiurim on Tuesday. Rav Amnon Bazak of Yeshivat Har Etzion, who's spoken a number of times for us. She attained shiur bivrit b'shtayim achar tzarayim in Eastern time at 2 p.m. Marachet Yechasim ben David Michal. And Wednesday at 10 a.m., Rabbi Yitzi Blau, the Rosh Yeshiva of Oraita, will begin a 4-part series in English on how to study Agadah. He has written extensively on the subject, and then we'll have all our regular shiurim all throughout the course of the week. But those are 2 other shiurim, and we just posted our Tisha B'Av program. It's a 95% complete, but you can see pretty much our speakers and schedules. Yael Ziegler, Doron Perez, Shuli Mishkin, Menachem Leiptag, Ari Zivitovsky, myself. And so we have basically from 11 to 7. Please God, I don't like to say Tisha B'Av. I don't like to say I look forward to Tisha B'Av, but I have found Tisha B'Av a very meaningful day ever since. The precursor to Torah in Motion is when I started doing Tisha B'Av programs back in 1988. The first year I came back to Toronto after living in New York, going to YU, etc. And it's really a very meaningful day. It can be a very meaningful day, even if it's not a happy day. One day, please God, it'll be a happy day. Anyways, that's can take a look. Obviously, since Shiva Sarbatom was the 3 weeks, but that's a time to reflect and renew and to hopefully improve all of us individually and communally. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful day. Shabbat Shalom. Hope you're not too hungry. And Mincha should be pretty soon. So thank you for that. And everybody be well. And we'll see you soon. Laila Tov. And as always, please invite a friend to join one of our classes. Okay, be well, everybody.